The night my father knocked on my door with 12 suitcases, he didn't apologize. He didn't ask how I survived 8 years of silence while serving my country. He smiled like nothing had happened and said, "We'll be staying here. You've got too many empty rooms." I remember the sound of the zipper teeth biting shut, the smell of his cologne mixing with my driveway's hot concrete, and the way my stepmother's eyes scanned my house like a real estate listing. That was the moment I realized they hadn't come to reconcile. They'd come to claim, and they had no idea who they were dealing with now. I'm not the kind of person who believes life owes me explanations. The army trained that out of me early. You learn to accept orders, endure discomfort, and keep moving when the ground under your boots feels like it's giving way. My name is Clare. I joined the U.S. Army at 21 the year after my mother died. Back then, my father told me he was proud. He hugged me at the bus station and said, "Serve with honor." He meant it, at least he did then. Things changed after he remarried. Her name was Lillian. She had a soft voice and a way of standing just behind my father as if she were letting him lead while quietly steering him in the direction she preferred. At first I wanted to like her. I brought her flowers on Thanksgiving. I called every Sunday. I sent photos from basic training, then from my first deployment. She always replied with short messages, polite, distant. "Stay safe. Your father says hello." Over time, my calls went to voicemail. My texts stayed unread. The first real cut came during my second year of service. I was stateside, exhausted, counting the days until leave. I called home to tell them I'd be visiting. My father answered, his voice tight. "This isn't a good time," he said. Lillian took the phone. "Your father's health can't handle surprises," she told me. "You should focus on your military life. That's what you chose." I remember staring at the cinder block wall of my barracks after that call, the fluorescent lights humming like insects. I told myself it was temporary. Stress makes people say things they don't mean. I sent a letter anyway. No response. Over the next year, the distance hardened into something colder. Lillian started telling relatives I was ungrateful that I'd abandoned the family for a uniform. My father stopped defending me. On my birthday, there was silence. On Christmas, nothing. When I was promoted, I mailed a copy of the announcement to their address. It came back unopened. The final break happened while I was overseas. We were operating on little sleep sand and everything, nerves stretched thin. I checked my email after a long shift and saw a single message from my father. No greeting. Just one line. "Don't contact us anymore." This is Lillian's decision, and I agree with her. 8 years. That's how long the silence lasted after that. I didn't rage. I didn't beg. I did what soldiers do. I compartmentalized. I folded the hurt, neatly locked it away, and focused on my duties. I led my unit. I trained recruits. I learned to read people quickly, to listen more than I spoke. On lonely nights, I ran until my lungs burned. Pain has a way of keeping you honest. During those years, I met my husband, Mark. He wasn't military, but he respected it. He built companies the way I built plans, carefully, methodically. We talked about values before anything else, loyalty, boundaries, work. He never asked me to choose between him and my service. When we married, my father wasn't there. Lillian didn't send a card. I wore my dress blues for the ceremony anyway because my life didn't pause for their approval. We bought our house last spring. A large one, yes, but not as a statement. Mark wanted space to breathe. I wanted quiet. The house sits back from the road, all stone and glass, with rooms that catch the afternoon light. When we moved in, I walked through it barefoot, feeling the cool floors under my feet, finally at peace. The peace lasted exactly 1 day. The next afternoon, I heard tires crunch on the gravel. I looked out the window and saw a familiar car. My stomach tightened, not with fear but with recognition. Mark stood beside me, silent. We didn't need to speak. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find my father, older, heavier, his shoulders rounded. Lillian stood at his side, impeccably dressed, her smile already in place. Behind them were 12 suitcases lined up like soldiers at inspection. "Claire," my father said, as if we'd spoken yesterday, "we're here." Lillian stepped forward, peering past me into the foyer. "Such a big place," she said. "It's only practical we stay. Family should be together." I waited for an apology, for an acknowledgement of the years. It didn't come. Mark appeared at my shoulder. Lillian's eyes flicked to him, then back to the house. She smiled wider. "You won't mind, will you?" she asked. "You have so much room." In that moment, standing on my own threshold, I felt something click into place. The training, the patience, the long memory. They hadn't come to make amends. They hadn't come because they missed me. They'd come because they saw something they wanted. I stepped aside and let them in. I didn't invite them to sit. They did it anyway. My father lowered himself onto the leather sofa like it belonged to him, exhaling as if he'd completed a long journey just to reach his rightful place. Lillian stood in the center of the living room, turning slowly, taking inventory. Her eyes moved from the high ceilings to the wide windows, then to the staircase, calculating square footage resale value possibilities. She touched the back of a chair with 2 fingers, testing the fabric. "You've done well," she said finally. "We always knew you would. Even if you didn't take the path we would have chosen." I didn't correct her. There was no "we always knew." There had only been silence. Mark offered water. My father accepted without looking at him. Lillian waved it off. "We'll unpack first," she said. "It's been a long drive." They hadn't asked if they could stay. They hadn't asked how long. In their minds, the decision had already been made. As they moved through the house, something in me shifted, not anger, not grief. Clarity. The same kind that comes before a mission when emotions quiet and details sharpen. I watched how Lillian walked slightly ahead of my father, how she answered questions meant for him, how he deferred with a nod or a shrug. 8 years ago, I'd wondered how he could choose her voice over mine. Now I saw it clearly. She didn't just speak for him. She replaced him. That night, after they claimed the guest wing without discussion, I lay awake, listening to unfamiliar footsteps echo through my halls. The house creaked differently with more bodies inside. I stared at the ceiling, counting breaths like I used to in the field. In the dark, memories surfaced uninvited holidays, spent alone, promotions, celebrated with coworkers instead of family. The ache of knowing my father was alive but unreachable. In the morning, Lillian was already in the kitchen rearranging drawers. She frowned at the coffee maker. "This model is inefficient," she announced. "We'll replace it." "We?" Mark asked mildly. She smiled at him, thin and practiced. "Family," she said, as if that settled it. Over breakfast, my father finally spoke. "We've been through some hard times," he said, staring into his cup. "Lillian's been worried about us, about the future." I waited. He didn't mention the 8 years. He didn't mention the letter. "We thought," Lillian continued, "that living together would be best. At our age, stability matters, and you can afford it." She said the last part like a compliment, not an accusation. I nodded. "For now," I said. "You're welcome to stay." Mark glanced at me. He knew that tone. It meant boundaries were being drawn quietly. Over the next few days, the pattern revealed itself. Lillian began suggesting changes, hiring new staff, consolidating accounts, updating paperwork in case of emergencies. She asked pointed questions about the deed, the mortgage, the insurance. When I deflected, she smiled and tried again later. My father grew smaller with each conversation. When I asked him directly what he wanted, he shrugged. "Lillian handles those things," he said. "She's better with details." At night, I watched security footage on my tablet the way I used to monitor perimeter cams. Old habits. Lillian wandered the house after midnight, opening doors, testing locks. Once she paused outside my office. I noted the time. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I remembered who I was before all this. The young woman who'd boarded a bus with a duffel bag and a head full of resolve. The soldier who learned that patience could be a weapon. 8 years of silence had taught me something valuable. You don't need closure from people who never intended to give it. You need truth. On the 4th day, Lillian invited a family meeting. She sat at the head of the dining table like a chairwoman, papers neatly stacked. "We should talk about long-term arrangements," she said. "Your father's health isn't what it used to be." I looked at him. He avoided my eyes. "Emergencies happen," she continued. "It would be responsible to have safeguards, powers of attorney, access to accounts, just in case." Mark leaned back, folding his arms. "That seems premature." She smiled at him again. "You're young," she said. "You don't understand these things." I did understand, perfectly. I excused myself and returned with a folder of my own medical directives, legal documents, all prepared years ago. "I'm covered," I said calmly. "Everything's in order." Her smile tightened. "You can't plan for everything." "No," I agreed, "but I plan for enough." That night I heard voices through the vent near my room. Lillian's voice sharp and low. "She's not as stupid as you think," my father murmured. "Then we'll have to be smarter," she replied. I closed my eyes, the last piece falling into place. They hadn't changed. They'd just run out of time and found a new solution me. The next morning I called an old friend from my unit, now working in legal compliance. We spoke briefly, efficiently. By the time I hung up, the path forward was clear. I would let them stay a little longer. Not because I owed them anything, but because sometimes the surest way to end a war is to let the other side believe they're winning. The house settled into a strange rhythm after that one that felt less like a family home and more like a staging ground. Lillian treated every room as provisional, every surface as negotiable. She made lists. She spoke on the phone in low, urgent tones, always turning away when she noticed me nearby. My father followed her like a shadow, carrying boxes, nodding at instructions, avoiding decisions. Watching him was harder than dealing with her. He had once been solid. Now he was malleable. Mark and I adjusted quietly. We moved our routines earlier, kept conversations brief in shared spaces, locked our bedroom door at night. He asked me once softly, "How far do you want to take this?" "As far as it needs to go," I said. That week, something unexpected happened. I found myself remembering my mother more vividly than I had in years. She used to say that people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching. She believed in calm strength in not raising your voice unless it mattered. I wondered what she would think if she could see this house, now her husband being guided by another woman, her daughter measured like a resource. On Friday afternoon, Mark came home earlier than usual. He set his briefcase down and looked at me with that steady expression I trusted. "I ran the numbers," he said. "If they're planning what I think they're planning, they'll need leverage, time, access." "They're working on it," I said. "They just don't know how much time they have." That evening, Lillian announced she'd invited a few friends over the next day. "Nothing fancy," she said. "Just people we trust. It'll be good for your father." I almost laughed. People she trusted had never included me. Saturday arrived with too much brightness. Sunlight poured through the windows, catching dust motes in the air. The guests came in waves, well-dressed, curious, glancing at the art, the floors, the view. Lillian played host effortlessly, her hand always on my father's arm, her laugh too loud. I watched from the edges, cataloging reactions. One woman asked me what branch I served in. When I told her, she smiled politely and said, "That must have been interesting." Lillian cut in smoothly. "Claire's always been very independent," she said, "sometimes too much so." I let it pass. As the evening wore on, I noticed Lillian steering conversations toward topics she favored: aging, responsibility, family duty. She told stories, revised ones, about how hard it had been after I left, how my father had struggled without me. She spoke as if I'd vanished by choice, not been pushed away. At one point she raised a glass. "To family," she said. "Sticking together when it matters most." I met my father's eyes across the room. For a second, something flickered there, recognition, maybe regret. Then he looked down. Later, after the guests left and the house grew quiet again, I found Lillian in the study, standing too close to my desk. She jumped slightly when I spoke. "Long day," I said. She recovered quickly. "You should consider formalizing some arrangements," she replied. "After tonight, it's clear people expect continuity." "Continuity of what?" I asked. She smiled. "Of leadership." That night I slept better than I had since they arrived. The pieces were aligning exactly as I'd anticipated. The next morning I told them I'd be traveling for work for a few days. Lillian offered to keep things running while I was gone. Mark and I packed light and left before dawn, but we didn't go far. We checked into a hotel nearby, one with reliable Wi-Fi and thick walls. From there we watched. The security feed showed Lillian moving faster now, more confidently. She went through drawers. She photographed documents. She brought my father into the office and closed the door. When she came out, she was smiling. I made calls, quiet ones, to a lawyer who specialized in elder law, to a colleague who understood digital forensics, to a friend who knew how to document patterns without alerting the subject. By the time we returned 3 days later, I was ready. Lillian greeted us at the door like a dutiful daughter. "Everything's fine," she said. "Your father's been resting." He stood behind her, thinner, somehow his eyes dull. "It's good to have you back," he said. That night I cooked dinner myself. I set the table carefully, using the good plates. Lillian watched me with curiosity. "What's the occasion?" she asked. "Clarity," I said. After we ate, I placed a folder in the center of the table. "I think it's time we talked honestly," I said. "About the past 8 years, about why you're here." Lillian opened her mouth, then closed it. My father stared at the folder like it might bite him. "I've been patient," I continued, "but patience isn't the same as permission." For the first time since they'd arrived, Lillian didn't smile. She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. "Careful," she said. "You don't want to damage what little family you have left." I met her gaze. "You already tried that." The room went very still. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Silence can be heavier than shouting if you know how to use it. Lillian recovered first. She always did. She smoothed her expression and glanced at my father as if reminding him of his lines. "We're here because we care," she said calmly. "Because you're successful now, and family should support one another." "Support goes both ways," I replied. "You disappeared from my life while I was serving overseas. You blocked my calls. You returned my letters unopened." My father shifted in his chair. "That was complicated," he muttered. "Was it?" I asked. I slid a second folder onto the table, copies of emails, timestamps, the unopened mail I'd kept in a box for years. Because from where I stood it was very clear. Lillian's jaw tightened. "You're dredging up old wounds," she said. "What good does that do?" "It establishes context," Mark said evenly. He hadn't spoken much since they arrived, but when he did, people listened. Context matters when decisions affect property and legal authority. Lillian's eyes flicked to him, then away. "This is between family." It stopped being that when lawyers became part of the conversation, he replied. The next few days were tense. Lillian backed off just enough to appear cooperative, but I could feel her watching, recalculating. My father stayed mostly in his room, emerging only for meals. When I tried to speak to him alone, Lillian always found a reason to be nearby. Then came the email. It arrived late one night, sent to my personal account. A draft document, power of attorney papers, partially filled out. My father's name typed neatly at the top. Lillian's suggested edits tracked in red. I stared at the screen, a familiar cold settling in my chest. Not fear, focus. The next morning I invited them both into the living room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, bright and unforgiving. I handed my father a printed copy of the email. "Did you know about this?" I asked. He stared at it, confused. "Lillian said it was just paperwork. In case something happened to you." Lillian stepped forward. "That's not fair," she snapped. "I was protecting him." "From what I asked." She hesitated for half a second too long. "From instability." I nodded slowly. "Then you won't mind if we bring in a neutral third party." That afternoon my attorney arrived, calm, professional, carrying a briefcase that seemed to drain the color from Lillian's face. We sat together at the dining table, the same place she'd tried to assert control days earlier. The attorney explained things plainly. Rights, consent, the legal implications of what Lillian had attempted. My father listened, pale and sweating. "I didn't agree to this," he said, finally looking at Lillian. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. For the first time, her confidence cracked. The attorney slid another document forward. "This is a formal notice," he said. "Your guests here. Any further attempts to access accounts, documents, or exert undue influence will have consequences." Lillian laughed sharply. "You can't do this. We're family." I leaned forward. Family doesn't ambush each other with legal traps. That night I found my father sitting alone on the back patio, staring at the dark lawn. I sat beside him, the space between us heavy with years. "I waited for you," I said quietly, "for 8 years. He swallowed. "I thought you didn't need us anymore." "I needed a father," I replied, "not permission." Tears slipped down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. The next morning Lillian packed. She moved fast, angry, muttering under her breath. My father stood in the doorway watching, lost. When she reached the car, she turned back once. "You'll regret this," she said to me. "Blood matters." "So does character," I answered. They drove away together, but something had shifted. I knew this wasn't over yet, not entirely. People like Lillian don't retreat quietly. And I was ready for whatever came next. When the taillights disappeared down the drive, the house felt larger than it ever had, quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful, yet just unfinished. I stood at the front window long after they were gone, my reflection layered over the dark glass. Mark came up behind me and rested a hand on my shoulder. He didn't ask if I was okay. He already knew the answer. "They'll try again," he said. "Yes," I replied, "but not the same way." I was right. 2 days later, my father called for the first time in 8 years. His voice sounded smaller on the line, like it was echoing from a room with bare walls. "Claire," he said, tentative, as if testing whether he still had the right to say my name. "Lillian is upset. She thinks you humiliated her." I closed my eyes. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, steady and indifferent. "She tried to take legal control of my life," I said. "Humiliation isn't the word for that." "She was only trying to help," he insisted weakly. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't just about Lillian. It never had been. It was about my father choosing comfort over truth again and again. Even now, even after the evidence, he was still trying to soften the edges of what she'd done. "I need you to listen," I said calmly. "Not as my father, as an adult responsible for his own choices." There was a pause. I could hear his breathing uneven. "I don't know where I belong anymore," he admitted. "You belong where you take responsibility," I said. "That's all I can tell you." He didn't argue. He didn't apologize either. We ended the call quietly. That afternoon, Mark and I sat with our legal team and mapped out contingencies: elder abuse statutes, trespass orders, documentation. We treated it the way I treated operational planning in uniform: anticipate escalation, prepare responses, never assume goodwill where there had been none. And escalation came quickly. Lillian began calling relatives, spreading her version of events. According to her, I'd turned my back on family out of arrogance. According to her, I'd used my wealth to bully an aging parent. I received messages from cousins I barely knew, from people who hadn't spoken to me in years, but suddenly felt entitled to judge. I didn't respond. Instead, I compiled every voicemail, every text, every email, dates, times, patterns. My attorney smiled grimly when I showed him the file. "This is thorough," he said. "It has to be," I replied. "She won't stop until she's exposed." The opportunity came sooner than expected. A week later, Lillian announced through a mutual acquaintance that she was hosting a family reconciliation dinner. Invitations went out. The tone was performative, sentimental. She wanted witnesses. She wanted a stage. She also wanted me there. Mark raised an eyebrow when I told him, "Are you going?" "Yes," I said, on my terms. The night of the dinner, I wore a simple dress, and my service medal pinned discreetly at the collar. Not as decoration, but as reminder to myself more than anyone else. Mark walked beside me, steady and silent. Lillian's house buzzed with voices when we arrived. Laughter, clinking glasses. She greeted us at the door like nothing had happened, air-kissing my cheek. "I'm so glad you came," she said loudly. "Family should heal." My father stood behind her, looking overwhelmed. When he saw me, something in his face shifted, fear maybe, or hope. Dinner was tense beneath the polite conversation. Lillian steered the narrative, expertly telling stories of sacrifice and misunderstanding, painting herself as the bridge builder. Several times she glanced at me, daring me to contradict her. I waited. After dessert, she stood and tapped her glass. "I'd like to say something," she announced. "Tonight is about forgiveness." I rose as well. The room stilled. "I agree," I said, "but forgiveness requires truth." She frowned. "This isn't the time." "It is," I said gently, "because I brought it." I nodded to Mark. He dimmed the lights and activated the screen we'd set up quietly earlier. Conversations filled the room, recordings, emails displayed timestamps clear. Lillian's voice unmistakable, discussing control access strategy. The room fell silent, except for the evidence speaking for itself. Gasps, murmurs. Someone set down a glass too hard. My father stared at the screen, then at Lillian. "Is this true?" he whispered. She tried to laugh it off. Out of context, she snapped, "You're twisting things." "No," I said, "I documented them." The weight of it settled over the room. Lillian's friends avoided her eyes. Relatives shifted uncomfortably. This was the moment she lost her audience. "I didn't come here to destroy you," I continued. "I came to end this." I turned to my father. I can't be part of a family built on manipulation. I'm stepping away, completely. Lillian shouted, then words tumbling over each other, accusations, insults, desperation. No one intervened. No one defended her. Mark and I left without looking back. Outside, the night air felt clean. I took a deep breath, my shoulders finally loosening. Was it worth it? Mark asked quietly. Yes, I said, because now it's finished. Behind us, the door slammed. Ahead of us, the road stretched open. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, quiet at first, then louder, sharper, harder to ignore. By the time Monday morning rolled around, my phone was full of missed calls and messages that ranged from tentative apologies to outright threats. I listened to none of the voicemails all the way through. I didn't need to. I'd heard every variation of denial before. Lillian, however, didn't retreat into silence. She escalated. She contacted my father's primary care physician and attempted to update his records, implying cognitive decline. She emailed Mark's office insinuating that I was unstable and unfit to manage finances. She even tried to file a wellness check with local authorities, framing it as concern for an isolated veteran under stress. Each move was clumsy, each one left a trail. When the officer arrived for the wellness check, he was polite and professional. I invited him in, offered coffee, and handed him a binder. Inside were timelines, legal notices, and a letter from my attorney outlining prior attempts at undue influence. The officer skimmed, eyebrows lifting. He closed the binder gently and nodded. Looks like you've got this handled, ma'am. I do, I said. That afternoon my attorney called. She's crossed a line, he said. Multiple ones. Good, I replied. Then it's time. We moved quickly. Cease and desist letters went out to Lillian and anyone acting on her behalf. A formal request for a protective order followed, citing harassment and attempted coercion. The documentation was airtight. Years in uniform had taught me the value of records, clear, chronological, unemotional. My father tried to reach me again. This time he left a voicemail. He sounded frantic. She says you're trying to ruin us, he said. She says you're turning everyone against her. I waited a full day before calling him back. I'm not turning anyone against her, I said when he answered. I'm stepping out of the way and letting her actions speak. She didn't mean for it to go this far, he insisted. She meant every step, I replied, including the ones you didn't stop. There was a long silence. Then quietly, I don't know how to fix this. You can't, I said. You can only choose what you do next. He didn't answer. The hearing for the protective order was scheduled 2 weeks later. Lillian arrived with a lawyer who looked tired before we even began. She sat stiffly, hands clenched, eyes darting around the room. When it was her turn to speak, she framed herself as misunderstood, overwhelmed, pushed aside by a daughter who'd come back with money and power. I watched her without expression. When my attorney presented the evidence, the emails, the calls, the attempted interference, the judge's patience thinned visibly. He asked Lillian a few direct questions. She deflected. He asked again. She snapped. That was it. The order was granted. Outside the courthouse, Lillian hissed as she passed me. You think you've won, she said, but you've lost your family. I met her gaze. No, I said. I protected my life. My father didn't attend the hearing. He sent a message later, a single line, I need time. I didn't respond. The days that followed were strangely calm. The house returned to its natural quiet. Mark and I resumed our routines: morning coffee on the patio, evening walks, conversations that didn't carry an undercurrent of tension. Still, something lingered unfinished. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls gold, my father's car pulled into the drive. He stood alone on the porch this time, no luggage, no Lillian. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. I left, he said simply. I moved out. I searched his face for certainty. It wasn't there. What I saw instead was exhaustion. I should have protected you, he said. I didn't. The admission hung between us, heavy and overdue. I can't undo the past, he continued, but I don't want to lose you forever. I took a breath. That depends on what you're willing to face. He nodded slowly. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't answer right away. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't a switch you flipped. It was a process, one that required consistency, accountability, and time. Start with distance, I said. From her, and from the idea that I'll clean up the consequences of your choices. He swallowed. Okay. I stepped back and gestured inside. We can talk. That's all I'm offering. As we sat across from each other, the house quiet around us, I felt something loosen, not fully, not completely, but enough to breathe. The war, I realized, wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming ground. And I had. The house felt different with my father sitting across from me at the kitchen table, smaller, somehow stripped of the tension that had haunted it for weeks. The late afternoon light slanted through the windows, catching the dust in the air, softening everything it touched. He looked older than I remembered. Not just physically, but in the way his shoulders slumped, in the way his hands rested on the table as if they needed permission to be there. We talked for hours that first evening, not about money, not about the house, about choices. He told me how slowly things had changed after my mother died, how loneliness crept in quietly, how Lillian filled the silence at first with comfort, then with opinions, then with control. He admitted that it had felt easier to agree than to argue, easier to let someone else decide than to confront the cost of those decisions. "I didn't think I was choosing her over you," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought I was just surviving." I listened without interrupting. 8 years ago I might have argued, I might have demanded explanations, but time and service had taught me that accountability means letting people finish their own sentences. "Surviving isn't the same as doing right," I said when he was done. He nodded. "I know that now." Over the next few weeks we moved carefully. He stayed in a small rental nearby, not in my home. That boundary mattered. He began counseling on his own initiative. He cut contact with Lillian, entirely forwarding any messages from her directly to his lawyer. He didn't ask me to intervene. He didn't ask me to smooth things over. That mattered too. Trust doesn't rebuild in grand gestures. It rebuilds in consistency. Mark watched all of this quietly, offering support without pressure. One night as we sat on the back patio listening to the cicadas hum, he said, "You handled this with restraint." "I handled it with clarity," I replied. "There's a difference." Months passed. The legal noise faded. Lillian stopped trying to reach out when it became clear there was nothing left to extract, no access, no leverage, no audience. Without conflict to fuel her, she drifted elsewhere. That too was predictable. My relationship with my father remained cautious but honest. We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. We didn't rewrite it into something easier to swallow. We acknowledged it piece by piece. Some days were heavier than others. Some conversations ended early. That was okay. One afternoon he asked if I regretted letting him back into my life at all. I thought about it before answering. "I don't regret protecting myself," I said, "and I don't regret giving you the chance to be accountable. Both things can exist at the same time." He nodded, tears in his eyes. This time he wiped them away. The house, the one that had started all of this, returned to being what it was meant to be. A place of peace. A place where my service didn't have to be explained or defended. A place where my worth wasn't measured in square footage or bank balances, but in the quiet strength of knowing who I am. Sometimes late at night I still think about those 8 years of silence, about the birthdays that passed without calls, the holidays I spent far from home, the letters returned unopened. Those memories don't disappear. They don't need to. They remind me why boundaries matter. Revenge isn't always loud. It isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's simply refusing to be used again. Sometimes it's living well without asking for permission. Sometimes it's choosing dignity over bitterness and clarity over chaos. I didn't win because my father and stepmother lost. I won because I protected my life, my marriage, and my sense of self. And that's enough. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, or pressured to sacrifice your peace for the sake of blood, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. We share stories like this every day, stories about boundaries, justice, and finding your footing again. If you don't want to miss the next one, please subscribe and stay with us. We're in this together.